I guess we'll call it meeting order. It's a special planning commission meeting, February 4th, 2016. Janelle, call roll.
Mr. Cox?
Here.
Mr. Posar?
Here.
Mr. Chavone?
Here.
Mr. Westbrooks?
Here. First item on the agenda is the proposed site plan approval for Highland Point Parkway Ambassador Football Complex. If you guys would like to come on up. Yeah, I see. Pull up those chairs if you need it. I thought maybe we get started letting you guys kind of give a quick talk of where we're at, what has changed since we were in last time. It's been a little while, but it's been just to make sure we understand what you're asking for.
I am David Hart, and I'm manager of planning services with the CP Consultants. As some of you know, I am familiar with Macedonia, having been here several times over the last several decades. I am going to be the spokesperson for the team tonight, at least initially, but with me, first of all, thank you for having a special meeting. We are eager to keep this project going, and there are some timetables that have to be met, so we're wanting to push this as reasonably along as we can. With me tonight are John Ortlip, who's president of Ambassador Football. He is sitting in the back. Chris Contour, who's with CPK Construction, is the development partner. And Chuck Miller with Doty Miller Architects. I think basically you can be dealing with Bill Doty on this project, but he's on vacation. As you know, phase one, this project is proposed in two phases. The preliminary plan for phase one was approved back in April. And also there was a question raised as to whether this was a permitted use in the light industrial district, and that has been resolved based on a letter that was submitted to the city by the law director. So we are here tonight to get final plan approval for phase one. We know and hope that there is a phase two for this project, but we recognize that that comes back for additional consideration by the Planning Commission when we're ready to, closer to the time to proceed with the phase two of this project. But we have, in the interim since April, we have received comments from the neighbors. We've met with the neighbors, and I think have been responsive to the neighbors in terms of changes to the phase one plan and stipulations that we have made that's in a memorandum of understanding, and I think you've received copies of that. And those stipulations are related to general stipulations that apply to the project period. And then we have some phase one stipulations, and then from phase two stipulations. All of these stipulations are related to going beyond what the zoning requires, or assuring that we will comply with the zoning if there was a question, particularly in phase two, as to whether we would comply with zoning requirements. And so I think it's fair to say that we comply with the zoning in phase two and have made sufficient, I'm sorry, said that wrong. We comply or exceed the zoning in phase one, and all of our stipulations assure that we will comply with the zoning when we come back for final development plan for phase two. In the area that we exceed the zoning, and the most important area, I think, is the project's relationship to the western property line and the residents on Bedford Road. Now, admittedly, we have a much bigger setback than is required. Memo says this parking setback needs to be 15 or 50 feet, depending upon how you interpret the code. But in either case, we are twice the setback that is required from the code requirement. If you assume that it's 50 feet, our closest setback is 92nd 97 proposed in phase 2, which is not really before you. But 115 feet or 17 feet is the parking setback for phase 1. Now, admittedly, some of that setback was imposed on us by wetlands and topography, but at the flip side, there's a benefit to the adjacent property owners that the existing vegetation, whether it's low or high, will be preserved and provide screening between this project and the neighbors. And one of our stipulations in the MOU is, even if the condition of the wetlands change, that we are obligated to not move into that setback area any further than is approved on these on this plan. So, with that, I can go through, Mr. Chair. I can go through the stipulations in more detail, or do you want to? How do you want to proceed from here?
Yeah, it's kind of different with the MOU. Maybe we'll go over the staff comments so that you can address that with the MOU. Maybe some of the things overlap, but maybe I'll have the staff.
I think
That's okay
fine.
with you guys.
Yeah.
And I guess I should say 2 of the members, Mr. Cox and Mr. Chavon, have not been here for the other meetings. They're new last meetings,
well,
so I don't know if how up to speed are you guys on this plan? Is this kind of the first you're really hearing about it? I mean, they could give a background on what they're really proposing if you guys.
Well, I've read all the documents that came through, and even at the last meeting, we had a pile of them.
Yes.
A huge pile.
Good stuff, yeah.
We read it thoroughly, and then on the internet, of course. So I think I'm familiar with it.
How do you feel?
I feel comfortable with the documents that were presented to me, and I looked it over.
Okay, so you don't need the full
I don't
start from
think
bottom.
I-
Okay.
This
Good,
is
good.
this is an easier drawing to. This is an easier set of drawings, so it's smaller. It's just smaller, so it's easier to page through if you. And it's the same thing with a couple of supplemental drawings on the back of it, but it's the same as the last set. And let me just say, just in case there's any questions about what the use is, it is for indoor recreation, primarily soccer. And it's all indoor, which is one of the stipulations in the zoning code, that all activity be inside. So it is totally an indoor facility. The only outside activity is the off-street, standard off-street parking, customer parking, employee parking that's associated with this use.
Question. It says existing building, the one you're, the phase 1. What's there now, or what was there?
No, the existing building language is on the phase 2
I know.
drawing,
Okay.
because it will be existing.
I couldn't see anything when I drove back there. I was confused.
Brian, you want to review your comments?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a report dated February 1st, and much to what Mr. Hart just described, this project has received a lot of review over the last year or so, and it's actually this evening, I believe the applicant's requesting a revised final site plan approval, because the project did receive a final plan approval November of 2015, I believe, and so I think the Planning Commission did approve it at that time, and this is a revision to that plan approval. So, with that said, I just have a few comments in my report. So the revisions in this plan essentially are again showing the phasing of the project into 2 buildings, and it's described in the memorandum of understanding as well. And that was previously showed at earlier stages of this planning process, and the applicant's showing that on there and documented in the MOU. There's an addition of a screening fence and a row of Austrian pines along that entire length of the parking lot and the cul-de-sac illustrated on the plan, and actually introduced by one of the residents. I don't see him here in the audience this evening, but it looks like in the memorandum of understanding there's the fence is going to include the Acoustablock. And that was actually introduced by a resident who first approached me back in like August or September of last year. I think that's the material that is used in some NASA applications for sound reduction. It's a real good, I wasn't familiar with it at the time, did some research on it. It's a real good application for the reduction of sound. So that or a similar product would be real good in this situation for noise reduction for the adjoining neighbors to the west. And that is documented in the MOU. And then finally, one of the other, what I call significant improvements is the building architecture. That has changed a fair amount for the positive, considerably changed, and has that somewhat of that Western Reserve look to it, real nice architecture. So I think that was a significant revision since November, and something that I think is going to be well appreciated when the project's built. So those are really the changes, the significant changes to the last plan. And just a few comments I had regarding this plan: the setbacks and the height, as previously documented, comply with the code. Planning Commission back in late 2015 in their approval did make the determination that the proposed parking, 87 parking spaces, I think the MOU might have said 83, but that level of parking is acceptable for this project. So I think that we look for some direction from the current commission, because there's a couple new members and the composition has changed. But I think that parking, again, was accepted by the commission at that time. And we had gone back and forth previously with some landscape mounds, maybe with some fence on top of it, and maybe there'd be just some new landscaping. And this plan really contemplates a mix of both, which is very nice. It shows the new landscaping in addition to preserving as much as possible of the existing tree line and a lot of the shrub and such that's on site, which will, I think, provide a nice barrier for those residents to the west, in addition to this acoustablock that's being proposed. So from that perspective, the plan is really airtight, if you will, with regard to protection to the neighborhood to the west. So that I noted in my report. And then the other thing I had commented on previously was the use of the boxwood bushes along the building facade. They're a nice species, but I just asked for or questioned possibly adding some things like some burning bushes or junipers, just to add a mix in of additional landscape species along that building line. Particularly the burning bushes grow larger and add color. So that'd be something that just still remain as a suggestion for the commission to consider. And then the other thing added to this submittal we had previously talked about is a photometric plan. And the photometric plan submitted does a real nice job of graphically illustrating the foot candle strengths associated with the light poles. There's in total 11 pole-mounted lights, 20 feet tall, and they're the LED technology. And then there's 3 wall packs proposed on the building. And all of the building or the lighting appears to be downward, aimed downward with horizontal cutoff. And the plan does document that there's no light spillage onto the adjacent property lines. So from that standpoint, the lighting plan is acceptable. In fact, I noted in here that there's really virtually no light being cast 30 feet west of the parking lot. So as you look at your site plan and to the neighborhood to the south, the foot candle strengths are cut off 30 feet just to the west of the parking lot, which means there's a significant buffer beyond that still remains before light would even cast into that western neighborhood. So lighting plan is more than acceptable, and so I had suggested that I felt that the revised plan did incorporate all the comments from previous reports. The memorandum of understanding that the city's entertaining, I think, is just another added level of protection for the community as well as the residents to the west. So I recommended that the plan be approved with some consideration of mixing in some burning bushes and such along the building facade. And I can answer any questions the commission may have.
Any questions for Brian?
None on that.
Okay. Right, new engineer. address your comments?
Sure. Thank you, Commission. Engineering has no comments on the plan at this time.
Can I say something?
Oh, yeah.
I have a couple of questions I'd like to introduce. Looking at the plans, I mean, there seems to be a difference of opinion, I guess, as to whether the drainage basin is a retention basin or a detention basin. Okay. I need clarification on that because the plans, I think your MOU states it's a retention basin. The plans show a detention basin. Okay. Now, are you going to have standing water there in that basin? If you're calling it a detention basin, or a retention basin rather, you're going to have standing water there, are you not? Okay. Are you going to have that then?
What it does is it, in a heavy rainstorm, instead of backing up into the offsite sewers, it has a holding area with a dammed perimeter, burned perimeter, with an outlet pipe that lets it go out at a controlled rate. So it only holds it as long as it takes to drain that out. So what it does is it keeps from flooding in other areas. So it holds it on only as long. It's not a pond. It only holds it as long as it takes to drain that out.
Detention should be the right word.
Well, if you look at the elevation shown on your plan, the bottom of your basin is below the invert of the 24-inch pipe going out. And I don't know how you calculated or how they calculated the volume for that. But I mean, I'm just looking at it now, you're going to have about 5 feet of water in there at one time.
No, so there is a percolation factor that has to take place too, that goes into the groundwater. So it doesn't contribute to the stormwater system by virtue of a certain amount of it going into the groundwater system.
Yeah, and to elaborate, the plan as submitted last week uses the word retention, indicative of a wet pond. And the contour lines that are drawn on the plan also are indicative of it being a wet pond holding water, holding some amount of water at all times.
Will this basin be clay lined?
Pardon me?
Will this basin be clay lined or will it be percolating?
Well, it can't be clay lined because it would make it a pond. So it needs to percolate into the ground. There's a mix that when we work with the EPA folks that they require in terms of vegetation and soil mix, so that it does drain properly in percolation. And it's come out, and they come out after it's installed periodically, every 6 months and so forth. Make sure nobody's mowed all of that foliage down and so forth. So it will have wetland type plants in that basin. So that are a specified mix that the Ohio EPA requires that we put in those type basins.
You feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, I think that would be an item for review, final engineering review. But at this point, as far as the Planning Commission review at this point, we have no problem with it. And like I say, the wording and the proposed contour lines that are shown both indicate retention, that it would have some water in it at all times. So,
I just have a question. What would it matter if it was then a partial retention?
If it wasn't,
and you put a clay basin, right?
Well, it would just mean that I would have to talk to our civil engineer about that because he designed this preliminary design. But I would imagine that we would have to calculate in a certain rainstorm the ability to hold a certain volume of water. Right. And in order to do that, we would have to expand the perimeter of that mounted area into a wider basin without as much depth.
Well, actually, the way that Havancic and Associates has done the civil work on this plan so far, and the way we got to the size was by calculating this as a 100-year flood. So in that, this size of this basin would be able to hold that amount of water. and then let it percolate into the storm sewer at a 6-inch rate. So the outflow's a 6-inch pipe. So that's how it's been designed.
I understand that. Usually, in cases like that, the engineer would provide like a schematic, a hydraulic schematic, showing the inlets and outlet structure, and eventually the disposition of the water going to some, in this case, the 24-inch sewer. Correct. Do we have anything like that? Was anything like that shown?
Yeah, Hovansik has submitted a preliminary stormwater management report, which, like Mr. Contour says, the pond is sized for the 100-year storm. I don't believe that it has the exact details of the outlet structure. That's typically an item for final engineering review.
Well, it would be referring to.
There you go.
Okay. I read through this too, and it still would be nice to have a schematic diagram, okay, which would show everything that's coming, where the water's going, where it's coming in, which would basically interpret this report in a graphical representation.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the reason we did that was just to determine the size.
I understand.
Because the size kind of drove how the plan was laid out for planning commission.
No, I understand that, and I understand the report. But usually, and like I say, there's a schematic, just a brief schematic showing a cross-section of the basin, the pipes coming in, pipes going out, showing your outlet structure and where it's going to. And I think that would be helpful in this case, because like we were saying before, the terminology is different on the drawings than it is on the MOU.
We will certainly have that as part of our final submission for engineering, which would come as part of the building permit submission. For sure, we'll have that on.
Well, the only reason I mention that too is because it is a wetlands area there. Okay, I don't think people would like standing water in there, any more standing water in a pond than what's there already that's going to be affected by that. You see what I'm getting at? I mean, usually with ponds, you have problems with infestation, insects, things like that. If you're going to get a pond, then you probably should aerate it somehow, and I don't think that's in here at all.
We believe that the way this is laid out from an engineering standpoint, that much of the water that now sheets to the west towards residents' properties will now be collected onto our site and then diverted into the retention pond and then filter out. So as far as their immediate backyards, we feel there's no way to determine that for sure, but all things point to the fact that that condition will be better.
I have another question for engineer too.
Sure.
Everything's going through this 24-inch pipe that was put in at the cul-de-sac end. Okay. Did you have a problem with that, or did you look at that? Is everything okay?
Yeah, no, we have no problem with that. You know, it's clear that the storm sewer system that was installed with the industrial park in the 90s was sized to handle a future development on this property.
Okay.
And the preliminary report also indicates that the pond will be restricting flows down to a level in which the 24-inch storm sewer would have no problem receiving that flow.
Mr. Bell? Cover yours. Comments?
Yeah, just as a heads up on the complex there, that the city ordinance requires a yard hydrant on an 8-inch line. So we'll need a yard hydrant on the north end of that complex based on where your bolt and where the line is going to be next to the entrance. I know in the preliminary for phase 2, it shows one on the east side at the far end, but that one won't do us any good on the phase 1. And that elevator that's proposed for future, That will have to be a 3,500-pound elevator to facilitate our fire rescue cots. On the smaller elevators, we cannot get the cot in there to do CPR on somebody.
Okay. Dennis?
Yeah, they've added some large masonry design elements here on the southeast and southwest elevations. They kind of pick up the design elements of the entrance and everything. Those have been, they do a great job of breaking up the elevation. That will all flat, the siding and everything. I think the only thing I'd like to stipulate for the board as to what the masonry materials are and what the awnings are, whether it's split face or color block or.
It's split face in a jumbo brick size.
Okay.
So it's a 4x8, it's a Sidley product. And we have the actual products here that we are using. The siding is a pack clad metal that you see on a lot of industrial type buildings. But as you know, the outside scheme is a combination of the red and the tan. There is an accent white band on this, so it's a colored all the way through masonry product.
Yeah, okay, so it's just half split face.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And then the metal siding color, which I think we've depicted on the illustrations, is it's a warm brown gray color. And then there's a cap that is an accent blue, and it also has some awnings and an entrance canopy that's that same blue color. Just to add a little bit of.
Are the awnings metal?
The entrance canopy is steel, and the awnings are a tight fabric.
Fabric, okay.
Do you have that description of those things, or is that in the plan?
I have it. I have it in some handouts here with me. Let's see. Here we go. These are the exterior materials here.
Let you guys have these. Because we may want to just make that part of the approval or something, just since it's not in the plan set. I guess keep the rendering up there. Jump to that for a second. So I was looking at the plans before this, and so, okay, the top, that's showing phase 1 and 2.
No.
Oh, that's just phase
No,
1?
I do have an illustration for 1 and 2.
Okay, that's. And 2 hasn't been designed, obviously.
2 is it's very schematic, but
Okay.
that shows you the footprint in proportion to the new building that we're proposing right now.
Okay. If you go back to the other one, then first I was going to have a comment that the front entrance there with the awning.
Yes.
When I'm looking at it just on paper, it looked somewhat undersized, and I thought, geez, it should probably match the other features around the building. But now, looking at it in the scale of the drawing, you're not proposing that height there to support something.
Right, because this is 32 feet high, with about a 33-foot height for that little break line. This is 16 feet high, so we have it raised up about another 4 feet, so it's about 20 feet there. To put it up, I think that high would really stick it up there, and we'd have to really put some struts on the back to keep it wind braced.
Yeah, and I think when I was just looking at one of these, I was just picturing, looking at the flat. I thought there was a building up against that to support that, but I guess that's not the case. Okay, I understand that better. Mr. Hart, maybe we can go through, if you want to give some of the things, I don't know if we go through the MOU and some of the agreements, unless, well,
on the building itself, on page 1. You show like a lower level, and that the finish floor of that lower level is basically the same finish floor as the phase 2, it looks like, correct? There's an adjacent crawl space along that. What is the purpose of that?
It's non-accessible crawl space, and the purpose of that is to brace, we have to build a retaining wall as part of phase 1 for phase 2 that's gonna be buried. So basically, we have to build it and then bury it, and then unexcavate that when we do phase 2. So that's the purpose of that crawl space. That actually keeps that wall intact. It's part of the bracing for the wall. It's what our engineer came up with for a design. But that's not accessible. It's actually kind of in the shape of a triangle, if you looked at it cross section.
So is
I'm going to
it,
ask because I see no access to it in there.
There is no access to it.
but that's confined space?
Pardon me?
That it would be considered confined space?
It's not an accessible space, but it's gonna be below grade when the
Right.
building is finished, when we do phase 2. It'll be an all below grade space. There won't be any
It may
utilities,
have to
there
be
won't be
suppressed.
utilities or anything in there. It's a
That's-
foundation.
It's a good question. You know, that's something that we would look into, whether we need to suppress that or not. My guess would be no, only because, first of all, you can't get to it. It would be like a buried, either a buried vault or a buried crawl space, or a space underneath that porch. Sometimes you'll build a porch with a basement under it, just so you don't have to fill it all the way up with 57 stone. It would be similar to that, in my mind.
Okay. But we'll have to take a good look at that.
Yeah.
We'll have to see what the code says about that.
Correct.
Can we go through the?
Yeah.
Let me,
Which one you want?
phase 2. Phase 2. So the general stipulations are that, one, as I mentioned earlier, we will not disturb any of the wetlands in here, either now or if they were to become unwet at some time in the future, or the rules regarding wetlands change. And a corollary to that is we won't disturb any of the trees in this buffer area either. And that's the first two stipulations in the MOU. The third one is that we will allow community, the primary hours of this facility for programmed activities are from 4 to 11, with the last round of events typically starting at 10 o'clock. So we have said we will open this facility for community use for about an hour in the morning. Typically that would occur before school, or after school in the afternoon up until 4 o'clock. So that's, again, a stipulation that we have, that is part of the, sorry. Then the fourth general stipulation is, and that's the site lighting, cutoff lighting, assuring that there's no spillage beyond the property. And Mr. Franz talked about that. And then one of the concerns of the neighbors was whether we were going to have a lot of pumps being used on the property. I think it came from the neighbors' concerns, and the answer is no. But we do have typically a sump pump for the under first floor area. And we will have a backup system to make sure in case of a power outage that will continue to work. So those are kind of the, and lastly, I'm sorry, we'll maintain the property, which is an obligation we have anyway, whether we put it in here or not, but we've just clarified that we're aware that we have to maintain the property as it was approved or as it was developed based on the approval of the city. The phase 1 stipulation is the solid and 6-foot vinyl fence with the acoustical dampening on the R side of the fence. So we preserve the look of the fence on the neighbor's side to the extent it can be seen through the vegetation. And then we will, this is a change from the earlier plan that you saw, because the earlier plan basically showed all the trees coming out in the both the phase 1 and the phase 2 buildable area, and all the way down on this northern part of the site to the buffer area. And what we have changed is we only need to grade the lighter green portion of the site. So until phase 2 is built, we will preserve this tree line to a minimum depth of 220 feet from the adjacent property line. And the way it's shown here, it angles, but we cannot, based on the MOU, cut trees any closer than 220 feet from the north property, I'm sorry, from the western property line. And then phase 2, we have agreed to land bank about 36 of the northern spaces that were originally proposed. If phase 2 proceeds and you add the parking for phase 1 and phase 2, that's about 280 parking spaces. We believe the capacity of this facility at any one time is about 240 people. If you had one per car, you need 240 spaces, and we think one person per car is highly conservative in this regard. So recognizing that we may have overparked it, we would agree to build less spaces in phase 2 if that's approved by the Planning Commission, and we say that in the MOU. We can't do that on our own. We have to get your approval. And then we would have the right, if it was demonstrated that it was needed, when we got into, after phase 2 were developed, we would have to come back to the Planning Commission to get permission to build those land bank spaces. And the benefit of that is it's less paving, and obviously it's more vegetation that gets that would be preserved. We would extend the vinyl fence with the acoustic block. In the first phase, it would go to roughly this point. In the second phase, it would go to the northern side of the property. And we would plant arborvitaes. This was a result of a meeting with the neighbors. We had no landscaping in here, and we would plant 10 of these in the landscape strip within the parking lot. And I think one of the key stipulations is that we will recess, and this I think is discussed at the preliminary planning stage as well, that we will recess the phase 2 building 10 feet below what the kind of the natural grade is here, and make sure that above that natural grade that the building would comply with the zoning height limit, which is 35 feet. And we would also, we've done a traffic study. That was to basically assess the impacts of phase 1 and phase 2. But we have agreed prior to the construction of phase 2, or prior to coming in for plan approval for phase 2, that we redo the traffic study with updated information for assessment at that time. And then based on the traffic study that's been done, it's actually calling for, when phase 2 is constructed, it's calling for a right turn lane for southbound traffic on South Bedford Road. And we have agreed to construct that lane, and actually they've specified in the MOU what we estimated cost for that is. That's even not knowing if the conditions change in the later traffic study. We've still committed now that we would build that lane based on the current study.
Yeah, I have another question concerning your parking requirements. The facility is an indoor soccer field, right? There's not going to be any seating for visitors or fans or whatever, people to watch the games or anything?
There's a viewing area that's actually part of.
Do
you have that on your?
Here.
There's actually viewing area that's part of the single-story addition next to the building.
Okay.
And that would be set up for parents, you know, who bring their kids to play soccer here so they can watch your kids play.
What about in phase 2, when you have the full field?
Phase 2, it hasn't been completely designed yet, but there is the potential for viewing area. Phase 2 goes over here.
But again, we're not asking for phase 2 approval.
I understand that, I understand that. But you bring up the requirement for parking, and if you're gonna have spectators viewing, then I think you're gonna have a lot more parking than if you just have, you know, kids and parents coming in to practice or play.
I don't think that's the intention, that there's a lot of spectators at this facility. And actually, what we did for the capacity for phase 1, we said 2 teams can play at a time. Each team would have 10 people, plus a few substitutes, plus a few parent drivers. And we assumed 20 people per team. So 2 teams are playing at once, that's 40, the need for 45, 1 per car. We doubled that in terms of our phase 1 parking, because we believed that you'd have people playing and then people arriving to play in the next round. So in effect, you'd have double the capacity there for a short period of time. We took that capacity for phase 1 and tripled it for phase 2 and said that's what we would need. So we actually tripled the parking in terms of the 270, 280 parking spaces. So there was some logic related to how this facility works to get to that number, and it still allows for some kind of spectator accommodation.
I would keep in mind too that the age group of kids playing soccer is about, say, 6 to 18. So of that group, only the 16, 17, and 18-year-olds can drive on their own. So the rest aren't going to be 1 per car. It's going to be at least 2 per car. So.
Well, the only reason I bring that up is that you have like soccer tournaments or things like that, you're gonna get a lot more people, like they, you know, viewing your kids and grandkids and whatever.
I guess I think it's fair to say we can address that when we come in for phase 2 and have a better sense and discussion on that as to whether we have sized it correctly. But even if the parking lot changes, we still have the stipulation that we are not going any closer than these lines to the property to the west and aren't doing any disturbance in that area.
Thank you.
You guys jump in anytime you want to. A couple of questions. It's a discussion. Okay, there's ability for mounting and not having the ability to mount. I know along the west property line, you know, there was not looking at mounting, I think, in that stretch through there. Right. Correct. Would it be possible to increase the height of the fence, maybe 2 more feet to make it an 8-foot fence?
Yeah, we're aware of that request because it came to us as well. Yes. There are 3 purposes of the fence. 1 is for security, 2 is for to screen the lighting of the cars, and 3 is to screen the building. We feel that the 6-foot fence is doing that, and there's no material difference in either of those 3 categories by going to an 8-foot fence compared to a 6-foot fence. So that's why we have continued, knowing that there was a request for that, continued to stay with the 6-foot height. It doesn't really change any of those factors in any material way.
You've actually illustrated that with the 2 different cross sections here at 2 different points. One here, which is represented by this one, and this one here that's represented by this one. And we actually, this is a height of a person is the red on one side, and this is line of sight. The fence is actually located here. So if you use that as the angle and you raise that by 2 feet, the difference from a person standing here would be imperceptible in our view.
And these are significant distances away from the homes.
I have an illustration here to try to support some of that view too, because we try to look at this by using our computer modeling. This is a view of a person that would be, the viewer would be 240 feet away from the building on the west side. The person that you see in the foreground is 20 feet away from the viewer, from the eye of the person looking that way. This is the building, phase 1 and phase 2 combined in the background. We've stripped all the vegetation out of the illustration. There are no trees in there except one tree that is 146 feet away from the viewer. So it's within the back area before it gets to the slope of the hill. We put a 25-foot tree there, which shows you what a 25-foot tree in a nearer foreground does. And there are many, many 25-foot trees in that back area. The brown line that you see on this illustration is a 6-foot fence. So you can see what that does to the view. If you add 2 more feet to that, I'm not sure it does anything more than an eyelash of difference. So the point is, in putting this in proper perspective, people standing in their backyards with some trees in their back areas, you can see what a difference that makes in terms of saving that vegetation that's there, in terms of diminishing the impact of that view.
There was, on the one side of the fence there was going to be the Austrian spruce. And there was, in addition to the residents asking for this additional feet, I'm sure you're aware of the other question from, could additional trees be provided?
Well, we provided them in the area that was going to be shed of screening trees because of the retention pond. And we don't think, again, it's materially different by adding this when this amount of existing vegetation, both low, scrubby, and higher trees, is being preserved in an area that is, again, twice the required setback. And we have the fence, and it's not an unattractive fence.
What is the proposed appearance of the fence from, your side would be the acoustic block?
We would put it on our side, and it would be basically a solid vinyl plastic.
It's not a half wall, it's an opaque wall.
Right, and we didn't put it in the MOU. We could stipulate to it. We've agreed that fence could be a dark color, whether it was a green or a brown or something.
Not a white stripe.
Not a white fence. So that would help subdue it in the vegetation.
And then we've got a few residents here. Is that the color of that? Is that what you think would be the best? I'm trying to picture something green, something brown, something.
Yeah, brown, beige, beige would probably be sufficient. I think white would more or less just jump
White
out.
would jump out. Would green favor the background better, or would brown look more natural? I don't know, and I don't know that.
Yeah, I think something more within the building color that matches. You don't want to put a dark green if the building's going to be a lighter color.
Sure.
Okay.
Building color's on the right. Not the piece of metal.
Metal color.
Right there. You can make it that color.
What about the brick color? The darker color? Or the darker color, if you thought that was going to match more with the vegetation. Subdue it in.
Probably a beige, beige to brown.
Well, obviously we're open.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
I understand that.
I think the darker colors than lighter colors.
I think usually the darker colors mask it in with the vegetation more, if that's the concern.
But a darker brown, not green with the trees and they would stick out.
That's fine.
What would the military do?
Camouflage.
In the acoustic block, I guess there was a third present concern that I think was beyond the MOU, is a specified acoustic block or a substantial, or something the same kind of stuff. I don't know, is there something you're thinking of?
Well, no, we have got the sample of the acoustic block, that's what we expect to use. The trouble is when we go to a planning commission or a zoning board and they say use a product, now they can charge us whatever they want. So we felt we had to have some latitude. This is what we would intend to use, yes. It's the product we intend to go with.
This is standard contract language.
I know.
We have to have it out in case whatever happens. Maybe they don't sell it by the time we're ready to buy it. So we have to have it out, and
I think
we would trust the administration to judge that the alternative product is similar to this.
That's all I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, it should be either that, or if you want to propose something else, you're gonna have to, send it past the administration's.
We agree
and
this
have
is
to
the best to get.
Buy off on it, but I do understand, you don't wanna lock yourself in so that they charge you triple and much stuff.
Mr. Chair, in my research, there's a few different manufacturers that are all basically the same thing, so.
Okay, so it gives you some options, and if you want something different than that, then yeah, send it to these guys and they'll take a look at it.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question on the MOU that I noticed and it was mentioned regarding the pump for the stormwater management? It says a backup system will be used to assure no disruption of service. What type of backup system were you proposing? And the only reason I ask is because if it's like a marine type battery backup system, I wouldn't recommend that because they will have a disruption of service. I think the best would be a water backup system. That's a seamless, flawless system then.
This is actually, and understand these pumps that we're proposing are for footer drains. They're not for stormwater.
Right.
So all of the stormwater, including the roof drains, the parking lot conductors, all of that will go by gravity into the pond. So the bulk of the water is going to go there. Anything that ends up at the footer drains will be pumped out with basically a cast iron pump. Those pumps will be backed up electrically with a backup generator.
So you're not gonna have a second system, like a water backup system?
We're actually gonna have more than one pump doing the same thing. We'll have redundant pumps, but then those will be backed up with a backup generator in case the power fails for some reason.
Commissioners, you guys have any comments or questions?
The building itself, I don't really have any, I think you did a nice job of redesigning that. And I think it was down to, mine personally, just down to the area, of the residents there. It would have been nice to have a satellite photo of that so you could picture the trees a little better as far as what.
This is actually a satellite photo.
Is that? Okay.
All of this down below is taken off of Google Earth.
It looks better on the bigger view than this is, okay.
So once we got into the property lines, we converted it into color, just so you can see it, but these are the actual
trees. Okay, I didn't know you just put that in there for.
No, that's for real.
That's the real one, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman? You mentioned generator, inside the building, outside the building?
Outside the building is gonna be optimal, if we can do it on the outside of the building. And this generator would be, no, natural gas, and this would be sized for pumps and some life safety equipment. So the size is gonna be it's gonna be residential sized. It's not going to be to back up the entire building. That's not necessary.
Well, there may be some requirements for screening and or crash protection based on where you put it.
I'm sure.
And be secured, fenced, or.
And on a pad, I'm sure, some sort of concrete pad.
Would it not be cheaper to go to a water backup system at that point?
Possibly.
And then you don't have anything outside?
Certainly would leave the, yeah, sure, I'd be open to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
driven by your city water, which is never gonna go off, right?
Right, yeah.
Sure. Well,
if it does, the city, you have a much bigger problem at that point.
Yeah, but I think that having the backup generator idea with an elevator is certainly more important.
That's true too.
It might not be a home generator to run the elevator.
Yeah, I guess the role I looked at, since I wasn't really familiar with this and we're new, and Joe and I are new on this, I just read the code sections, and and then I understood that this whole thing has been approved back in November, and these are just for the revision. I think this is it, just the add-ons and the memorandum of understanding. And to me, you don't need a variance, you don't need anything. It meets the code sections for light industrial back there. And that building, I drove back there, that would be prettier than anything that's back there already, as far as I understand it. It seems like overkill talking about burning bushes or boxwood in an industrial area. This is not on a main street. And I thought it was rather extraordinary to be adding a parking turning lane on a road that doesn't even front this place. So to me, it seems like rather an easy thing to go along with this. In an industrial park, you know, it's not, it struck me as kind of an easy case. That's my comments. I just make comments on this.
I guess, since this has been kind of a controversial thing with the residents, if you guys want to take a few minutes and.
I would like to make a statement, yes. This soil in this area, if anybody has looked at the soil reports for this facility in this area, is very good for percolation. The location of the detention basin, the area they have it in right now, if anybody has looked at the geo wet mapper, they will see that that is the worst area behind those people's property. We have a constant groundwater at 977. 977. Our elevation factor are consistent at 983. To let any water percolate from that building area into that retention basin and then percolate from there back into the groundwater, I think would create a problem, especially for those people on that southerly end. I putting any more water after putting all that parking space in the buildings and everything, I think everything is going to be clay lined, or I think there's going to be more problems. I know Mr. Festball, he has an in-ground pool, and during the winter it froze and pushed the pool right up out of the ground. That's how much water is down there. So that's my statements, and thanks for your questions on the retention basin.
I read the report too.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, the intent is not to discourage building, obviously, but the site is questionable. But the site development is basically your project. Okay. And I appreciate what the homeowners are saying with respect to that. Groundwater has always been a problem, okay? And that's why I brought up the retention configuration and terminology and whatever.
Yeah, I don't want to push, we're sensitive to the comments that are made tonight, and I don't want to push this issue under the rug, but this is typically what happens after you get final development plan approval from the Planning Commission, that the details and the adequacy of the engineering to make sure we're improving and not making the problem worse is up to the engineers to
I agree totally.
Duke it out.
I agree totally. Yes, yes. You know, if it can't be designed that way, then fine.
That's right. And we recognize that if the design of this system changes in the geographical area, the flat plain, we probably have to come back to you and get a modified final site plan. But I think what this group has been saying with the engineers, that it has gone far enough to know that we can do it and meet proper engineering standings within this general configuration.
As long as it can be engineered, you know, without future problems, I don't think there's an issue, you know. But I think the point was, these things have to be addressed. And we just want to emphasize that. I'm sure they were before, but I think the purpose of this is just to emphasize that so there's no misunderstanding later on.
No disagreement with that.
I think it's a very good point. I just, if I can raise my hand on this, is that Jerry makes a good point, so do you, Joe. as it relates to the percolation and what might get leached into the properties that are below it. So my concern would be to try to contain the water and get it out of there. So if it means putting in a clay basin into there, I would be more in favor of that, knowing how the water may leach down, especially with elevation difference. So, Joe, but I'm not an engineer to make those determinations, but it just reasonably sounds better.
And Mayor, I might offer too, if it's conceivable that we make that pond smaller and the outflow larger, we would be open to that certainly. So, you know, we designed this thing for the whole shooting match, but if between the engineers they find out that it's going to be better, we've got a 2-foot pipe coming into our property. We've got a 6-inch outflow right now in the pond. So, you know, it's possible to go a different direction, and we would be open to doing that.
Yeah, I do have a comment, Kevin. There are some major changes that have been provided by the developers here. I think, and I heard Mr. Cox say it meets the code for light industrial. One part that I'm concerned about is what you brought up, Mr. Strong. The second phase, I believe, assumes a tournament process at some point. Is that not true?
We don't assume anything with the second phase.
Well, I mean, at least when I attended the first meeting, sir, it was clear that the point would be to try to create a situation in which you would have occasional tournaments from around the country coming in here. Would that be correct? I question, Mr. Cox, whether that is in fact what is intended by light industrial. And I think that one of the things, phase 1 has never been an issue except for design and making sure it doesn't become a problem. But phase 2 assumes something that I don't think really addresses the issue here, which is the fact that we're going to have a large group of people coming into a public facility to, you know what I mean? I mean, this is just the basic issue here. Nothing else, to my mind. Engineering can take care of the rest. I assume, it sounds like the water's right up to your tiptoes there when you go onto the property, so you got to design around that. Makes it difficult, I guess. But the issue is, this is a residential neighborhood abutting this light industrial area. And the concern I think they have is a legitimate one which should be considered by the Planning Commission, which is not the phase 1 issue, but the phase 2 issue. Is this going to change the character so much that there's a degradation of the value of those homes? And nobody has actually addressed that in terms of somebody coming in and appraising how that would affect this. I think they should, because I believe that is the issue. So that's all I have to say.
Are we on phase 2 yet on this?
We are not, but I believe it's been determined previously that the use is okay.
I thought we had
It's been
determined that.
established previously that the use was acceptable.
There was some disagreement on that from the attorneys. So I don't think that it's been established in the, I mean, we can all say anything, but we can all get sued, and I've noticed that court is a happenstance where you can go on for years and years and years and pay a lot for it. I'm just saying from the point of view of the residents, this whole area was residential, and it did have an industrial.
Not this area.
It had an industrial area behind it, but having a public facility with outsiders.
It's not a public facility.
Well, that's a, I don't know what you call it, maybe there's a legal term here, but when you have a bunch of people coming there who are not residents and not there to buy something or to build something.
Wasn't this approved back, didn't we, this whole thing wasn't approved already? You're asking us to unapprove it?
I'm asking you to go back and look at what that really means.
To rescind the order.
You're a different planning commission, the mayor obviously was in that other planning commission. But I'm just asking you to look at it, that's all, because I think that's what needs to be addressed.
Let me comment on that. I thought I said earlier in my earlier presentation that the issue came up as to whether this was a permitted use in the industrial district. And the law director has sent a letter to the city, I guess it was directed to the mayor, saying yes. And I believe that the mayor, the law director had an understanding that that this use could occur anywhere on the site, including the phase 2, and was aware of the phase 2 possibility.
That's what I understood.
I believe you're correct, sir.
And then I will say, you know, and I've said to the residents and said to my client, this is a quieter use, even in full development, than many of the industrial activities that could occur here. Could there be more people on the site? Perhaps, but there's no truck traffic. There's no nighttime operation with doors open and outside and things of that sort. So of all the alternatives that are possible, it seems to me this is probably one of the more quiet uses that you can envision.
I guess that would be the question. And we have, what we're talking about are X number of strangers coming into a residential area. And whereas in an industrial use, whatever the noise issues are, which could be mitigated, you're talking about a very limited number of people, you know, 100 people. So, and it is true that the law director did give that opinion. There was an attorney who represented the residents who gave a different opinion, which I would recommend you have a look at.
All right. With that being said, I'm trying to think what other loose ends. I mean, the MOU is definitely not a fully completed document. I mean, it was written up, I think it's been commented on by the city, it's been commented back again by you guys, it's been commented by the law department. I think it's probably in a pretty good shape. I think everybody probably still needs to have a final okay on it, but I think all of the elements we've discussed are in here at this point. So I think, in theory, this is probably the final document, minus some textual edits.
We agree, and actually, I talked to Mark Gadetti this afternoon, and he had basically made what we believe were the final changes. But I think it's fair to say that this is an MOU between the applicant and the administration based on whatever you report out. So if there are any things that need to be changed based on your reporting out, we will change it. But we think we've gone as farther than the code requires and as far as necessary, and we believe that this is reasonable accommodation to some of the comments that have been made in the last several months.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I agree with Mr. Hart. This is something that would typically, the inputs received by the applicant of the comments made by the public and the Planning Commission, and this would be something then that would be revised by the applicant, submitted through the, most likely the mayor's office, and administratively finalized outside of the Planning Commission.
I just might indicate that the versions have been sent over to the law department so that the law department could put it at legalese. So we've gone back and forth. This is, I think, maybe the third revision to it. And because we created the memorandum of understanding, which is not typically done on any projects, which is a good thing to have, by the way, but because this is being done in phases and because of the controversy of this project, we wanted to make sure that it was a solid document that we could all rely on now and into the future. So I think we have covered all the bases. And I think that this final revision that I received today was based on the law department's revisions.
Kevin, what are we supposed to vote on tonight?
So tonight would be site plan, final site plan approval for, revised site plan approval for phase 1.
Right. Revised, right?
Revised.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only for phase 1. It is not, I mean, I guess, are we including lighting in this? Where's the lighting? You've seen the lighting. It wasn't in this packet. It's been in the the supplemental stuff you gave tonight.
It's in there. It was in there.
Yeah, it's in the original.
Is it in the original? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, I just didn't see
and
it.
the photometrics are there, which all
Okay.
indicate no spillage. I think it's more than acceptable.
Is landscaping and signage, well, signage I know for sure, landscaping.
Separate.
It will be separate as well.
The signage will definitely be separate.
So landscaping plan.
I'm not sure what the intent of the applicant on landscaping, if you're gonna have an individual
We have a
landscape.
landscape plan as part of the set, it's here too.
There is on.
We're also hoping for building approval, building design approval as well as the site plan approval.
Yeah, I think that, yeah,
Would-
including that, the site plan.
Right, you would get that by virtue of approving the final site plan, that it's required as part of it, so you'd effectively be getting that this evening, the architectural approval. The only thing I would say, Mr. Chair, under 1137, just you want to approve it pursuant to 113705E, which does include provisions for revisions to the approved final site plan. So just maybe reference 113705E.
Not to mislead or whatever, but Mrs. Heineken brought up some good points, and I'm sure the adjacent landowners are concerned about their value of the properties, and I understand that. Based on what I see here and what is presented, very honestly, with the setbacks we have, the distances we have from the houses to the project in question, I appreciate what you're saying, but my personal opinion is I really don't think that there's a real serious issue with any devaluation here or anything like that that's going to happen on account of that. I had sometimes thinking about this, and across the street you have some other buildings and other industries, whatever. I just don't see it very honestly. That's my opinion. Just to make it clear.
That's fine. I just think we really, obviously it's all speculation with regard to that, but, and it is set back. I just think the use of it changes the whole security outlook for the area and everything. That's the bottom line.
Are you ready for the motion?
Yeah.
Want me to give it a whirl?
Go for it. Take a shot.
I'd approve the revised site plan as submitted for Phase 1 and pursuant to Code Section 113705E. That's my motion. Does that sound right?
Any recommendations, wording, does the MOU need to be mentioned at all in this?
I don't believe so. Again, I think that's going to be handled administratively through the mayor's office.
You heard that. She heard that, I heard. Okay.
All right. A second? Second. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Don't forget, if there's any other, on the agenda,
Paper.
we'll be back again Monday night.
Yeah. The next one. Second, all in favor? Aye. Thank you.